What happens when two Hollywood legends collide in the most explosive showdown in daytime television history? Last night on The View, Samuel L. Jackson and Whoopi Goldberg went head-to-head in a battle that ended with security being called. It only took 21 seconds for everything to fall apart. Before we dive into this chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the drama that happens when the cameras keep rolling. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to celebrate Samuel L. Jackson's incredible career and his upcoming projects. The promotional team had it all planned out. They were going to discuss his new film, talk about his legendary roles, maybe share some funny behind-the-scenes stories. Instead, it turned into an absolute disaster. The tension started building the moment Jackson walked onto that stage, and if you looked closely, you could see it in his eyes. Something was already simmering. The audience applauded as Jackson made his entrance, that iconic walk everyone recognizes from his films. He was wearing a sharp suit, looking every bit the Hollywood legend he is. But there was something different about his energy. Not hostile exactly, but guarded. Whoopi Goldberg stood up to greet him, opening her arms for a hug. They embraced briefly, but it was one of those hugs that felt more like a formality than genuine warmth. As they pulled apart, Whoopi's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and Jackson's expression remained neutral, almost cold. "Sam, it's so good to have you here," Whoopi said as they both sat down, her voice warm but with an edge that suggested something was brewing beneath the surface. "We've been looking forward to this all week. We've got a lot to talk about today." Jackson nodded, settling into his chair with that cool confidence he's known for. But his body language told a different story. His shoulders were tense, his jaw was set. "Always good to be here, Whoopi. Always good to see you all." The other hosts chimed in with their own greetings, trying to keep things light and friendly. They asked about his flight, about how he was feeling, the usual small talk. Jackson answered politely but briefly, giving short responses that didn't invite much follow-up. The hosts exchanged quick glances, sensing that something was off. Whoopi, being the veteran that she is, decided to just dive in rather than dance around whatever tension was in the air. "Let's get right into it, Sam. You've been pretty vocal lately about certain issues in Hollywood. Some people are saying you're stirring the pot unnecessarily, that you're creating division where there doesn't need to be any. What do you say to that?" The question landed like a bomb. You could feel the temperature in the studio change instantly. Jackson's eyes locked onto Whoopi's, and for a second, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. You could see Jackson's expression shift dramatically. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward in his chair. "Stirring the pot? That's what we're calling it now? I'm speaking truth. I'm calling out behavior that's been accepted for way too long in this industry. There's a huge difference between stirring the pot and calling out what's been wrong for decades, Whoopi." That last line hung in the air. It was a challenge. It was Jackson saying, without saying it directly, that Whoopi should understand the fight he was fighting. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. "But don't you think there's a way to have these conversations without making everything so confrontational? Without pointing fingers at specific people and dragging their names through the mud? There's a difference between advocating for change and just attacking people, Sam." "Pointing fingers?" Jackson's voice got sharper, louder. You could hear the frustration building. "Whoopi, when you see something wrong, when you witness injustice happening right in front of you, you call it out, you name it. You don't tiptoe around it and hope it magically fixes itself. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. And I'm not about to stop now just because it makes some people uncomfortable." The audience was completely quiet now, the air thick with tension. People shifted in their seats. This was supposed to be a fun morning talk show appearance, but it had turned into something else entirely. The other hosts sat frozen at the table, just watching this confrontation unfold. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms across her chest. Her voice took on a harder edge. "Here's what I'm getting at, Sam. And I'm going to be very direct with you. You've been criticizing people who've worked their entire lives in this industry. Good people. People who've opened doors for others, who've fought battles you don't even know about. And you're doing it publicly, loudly, on social media, in interviews, without considering the real damage it might cause. Jackson's eyes flashed with anger. Damage? The damage was already done, Whoopi. I didn't create the damage. I'm just making sure people know about it. And yeah, some of those good people you're talking about, they're part of the problem. They're the ones who close doors in people's faces. That's a serious accusation, Sam, Whoopi shot back, her voice rising steadily. Her hands were gesturing now. You can't just throw that around without specifics, without proof. You're painting with a broad brush, and that's dangerous. That's reckless. I've given specifics, Jackson said, his voice getting louder to match hers. I've named names. I've talked about specific incidents that happened, when they happened, where they happened. Don't act like I'm just running my mouth without backing it up. Whoopi shook her head vigorously. But that's exactly what concerns me, Sam. You're going after people's reputations, their careers, their legacies, based on your perspective of events, your version of the story. And you're treating your version like it's the only version. My version? Jackson's voice boomed now, echoing through the studio. Several people in the audience visibly jumped at the volume. It's not my version when there are multiple witnesses. It's not my version when there's documented evidence. What you're doing right now, Whoopi, is exactly what's wrong with this industry. You're protecting the wrong people. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The cameramen kept filming, knowing they were capturing something extraordinary. Whoopi's face hardened, her jaw set. I'm not protecting anyone, Sam. I'm asking you to be responsible with your platform. You have millions of people listening to you, young actors looking up to you. And when you go on these public rants, what message are you sending to them? Rants? Jackson stood up, slightly in his chair, his body language becoming more aggressive. His voice filled every corner of the studio. These aren't rants, Whoopi. This is accountability. This is what it sounds like when someone refuses to be quiet anymore. Something Hollywood has avoided for too damn long. Don't you dare raise your voice at me, Whoopi said firmly, pointing a finger directly across the table at him. Don't you dare. We can have this conversation like adults, or we can't have it at all. Jackson laughed, but there was zero humor in it. It was bitter, angry. Like adults? You invited me here to have a conversation, Whoopi. You knew what my positions were, and now you're telling me I can't express myself? That's rich. One of the other hosts tried to jump in, but Whoopi held up her hand sharply, cutting them off. This was between her and Jackson now. You can express yourself all you want, Whoopi said, her voice steady but cold as ice. Every word was measured, deliberate. But you don't get to come on this show and disrespect the process. You don't get to act like you're the only one who's been fighting these fights, like you invented activism in Hollywood. You don't get to stand there and act like you're the only person who's ever cared about making things better. Some of us, Sam, some of us have been doing this work quietly, behind the scenes, in rooms where real change happens, for years, for decades, long before you decided to become Hollywood's moral compass. That hit hard. You could see it in Jackson's face. His eyes widened slightly. His nostrils flared. Quietly? His voice dripped with sarcasm so thick you could practically see it. Quietly? And how's that worked out, Whoopi? Tell me, how much has really changed with all that quiet work? How much progress have we actually made with all those closed-door meetings and private conversations? Because from where I'm sitting, from where I'm watching this industry operate, not a damn thing has changed. Unless people get loud about it, nothing changes until someone makes enough noise that it can't be ignored anymore. Whoopi stood up now, pushing her chair back with enough force that it made a loud scraping sound against the floor. She was matching his energy, meeting him at that level of intensity. You don't know what I've done, Sam. You don't know the conversations I've had in boardrooms, in executive offices, in casting sessions. You don't know the doors I've opened for young actors who remind me of myself. You don't know the young people I've mentored, the careers I've helped launch, the battles I've fought when there were no cameras around to give me credit for it. You don't get to come here and diminish that, diminish my life's work, just because it doesn't fit your narrative of what activism should look like. Your narrative? Jackson was fully standing now, his tall frame imposing, his voice filling the entire studio, and probably bleeding into the hallways backstage. This isn't about narratives, Whoopi. This isn't about who gets credit or who looks good on camera. This is about truth. This is about justice. This is about making sure that the next generation doesn't have to deal with the same bullshit we dealt with. And if you can't handle the truth, if you can't handle someone calling out the system for what it is, then maybe, just maybe, you're part of the problem too. The audience gasped collectively. Several people covered their mouths. That last line crossed a major boundary, and everyone in the studio knew it. Everyone watching at home knew it. You don't tell Whoopi Goldberg that she's part of the problem. You especially don't do it on her show, on live television, in front of millions of viewers. Jackson had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of daytime TV. Whoopi's face went from frustrated to absolutely furious in an instant. Her eyes were blazing, her hands were shaking slightly. Her voice, when she spoke, was dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that's more intense than screaming. Excuse me? What did you just say to me? Did you just call me part of the problem? Jackson didn't back down even a single inch. He stood his ground, staring right back at her. You heard me perfectly well. You're sitting here, defending a system that's fundamentally broken, defending people who've done wrong, who've hurt others, and attacking me for speaking up about it. If that's not being part of the problem, Whoopi, if that's not complicity, then I honestly don't know what is. I really don't. Get out, Whoopi said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. The words were simple but carried enormous weight. Jackson blinked, seeming surprised for the first time since this whole confrontation started. What? I said, get out of my studio. Whoopi's hand was visibly shaking now as she pointed toward the exit, her entire arm extended. Get out. Now. You don't come into my house and disrespect me like that. You don't come onto this show, onto my show that I've built over years, and accuse me of being part of the problem. I've given my entire adult life to making things better in this industry. My entire life. And I will not. I absolutely will not stand here and let you tear that down because you're on some kind of crusade. Your house? Jackson's voice was incredulous, almost laughing at the absurdity. This is a television show, Whoopi, not your personal living room. This isn't your private property. And yeah, I'll say what needs to be said. I'll speak the truth that needs to be spoken, whether you like it or not, whether it makes you comfortable or not. That's not going to change. Security! Whoopi called out loudly, not breaking eye contact with Jackson for even a second. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed. Security! Get in here now. We're done here. This interview is over. This conversation is finished. The other hosts sat absolutely frozen at the table, their faces showing pure shock. One of them had her hand over her mouth. Another looked like he might try to say something but couldn't find the words. They were clearly stunned by how quickly this had gone from a tense interview to a full-blown explosion. The audience was completely silent now, not a single sound except for a few shocked whispers. Some people looked genuinely scared. This was not what anyone had signed up for when they came to watch a taping of The View. 2 large security guards appeared at the edge of the stage within seconds. They'd clearly been standing by, listening to the exchange and probably getting instructions through their earpieces to be ready. They didn't touch Jackson, keeping a professional distance, but their presence was unmistakable. They were there to escort him out if necessary. Jackson stood there for a long moment, just staring at Whoopi, with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and what might have been disappointment. You're really Doing this? You're really kicking me off your show for telling the truth? For saying what everyone in this industry is thinking but too scared to say? I'm ending this interview because you've shown that you can't have a civil conversation, Whoopi responded, and her voice was still cold, still controlled, but you could hear the emotion underneath it threatening to break through. You came here with an agenda. You came here looking for a fight. You came here wanting to make headlines. And congratulations, Sam. You got one. You got exactly what you wanted. Now leave my studio. Jackson looked at the security guards, then back at Whoopi, then at the cameras that were still rolling, still capturing every single second of this absolute disaster. The red lights on the cameras seemed to be burning brighter than ever, documenting this moment for posterity, for history. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Jackson said, shaking his head slowly, deliberately. This, right here, this moment. The moment someone challenges the status quo, the moment someone refuses to play nice and stay quiet and go along with the program, they get silenced. They get removed. They get shut down. You're proving my point right now, Whoopi. You're literally proving everything I've been saying about this industry. I'm not silencing you, Sam, Whoopi said, and now there were tears of frustration forming in her eyes, though she was clearly fighting to hold them back. I'm not silencing you. You can go say whatever you want, wherever you want, to whoever will listen. Just not here. Not on my show. Not when you're going to disrespect me and everything I stand for. Not when you're going to spit on everything I've worked for. Jackson reached down and grabbed his microphone, the small clip-on mic that had been attached to his lapel. He pulled it off roughly, not caring if he damaged it or his suit jacket. He dropped it onto the table with a loud thud that echoed through the studio, the sound picked up by all the other microphones. It was a deliberate gesture, a way of saying he was done with this conversation on his own terms. Fine, Jackson said, his voice level but intense. Fine? I don't need this platform anyway. I don't need your show. I don't need your validation or your approval. I've got my own voice, and people are listening to what I have to say. People are hearing me. And that's what scares people like you the most, isn't it? That someone might actually create change without going through the proper channels. Good for you, Whoopi said dismissively, turning away from him with a dramatic gesture. That's just wonderful, Sam. Use your voice somewhere else. Use it anywhere else. Just get out of my studio. Jackson started walking toward the exit, the security guards following a few respectful steps behind him. They weren't grabbing him or forcing him out. They didn't need to. Jackson was leaving, but he was doing it on his own terms, with his head held high and his dignity intact. But he wasn't going to let this moment pass without one final statement. He stopped halfway to the exit, his footsteps echoing on the studio floor. The entire place was silent except for those footsteps. He turned back to face Whoopi, face the cameras, face the audience that was sitting there in stunned silence. His voice, when he spoke, was powerful and clear, carrying to every corner of the studio. You all saw this, right? Everyone watching at home, everyone here in this studio. You all just witnessed what happens when you speak truth to power. They shut you down. They kick you out. They protect their own, no matter what, no matter who gets hurt in the process. This is how the system maintains itself. This is how nothing ever changes. People like me get removed, and people like Whoopi get to keep their comfortable positions by making sure no one rocks the boat too hard. Oh, please. Whoopi spun back around, unable to let it go, unable to resist, getting the last word. Her voice was sharp with anger. Stop with the martyr act, Sam. Just stop it. You're not being persecuted. You're not some brave truth-teller being silenced by the establishment. You're being asked to leave because you can't conduct yourself professionally, because you can't have a disagreement without making it personal, without attacking people. There's a massive difference between those two things, and you know it. Professional? Jackson laughed again, that same bitter, hollow sound. You want to talk about professional behavior? Okay, let's talk about professional. Let's talk about all the unprofessional things that have been allowed to happen in this industry, while people like you stayed quiet. While you all protected your friends and your careers and your access, instead of protecting the people who were actually being hurt, the actors who got passed over because of their race, the directors who never got a chance because they didn't fit the mold, the writers whose stories were stolen, the young people who got taken advantage of by powerful people who knew they could get away with it. That's what we should be talking about when we discuss professional behavior in Hollywood. That's enough. Whoopi's voice cracked like thunder, louder than it had been all morning. Her composure was breaking now, the carefully maintained television persona slipping away to reveal genuine anger underneath. You don't know what you're talking about, Sam. You don't know the half of it. You don't know the sacrifices I've made, the battles I've fought when no one was watching, when there were no cameras to document my activism, the people I've protected, when no one else would step up. How dare you come here and judge me? How dare you reduce my entire career, my entire life's work, to me being part of the problem? I'm not judging you, Whoopi, Jackson said, and for a moment his voice was quieter, less aggressive, but no less intense. It was actually more powerful in its quietness. I'm really not. I'm asking you to do better. I'm asking all of you, everyone in this industry, everyone with a platform and power and influence, to do better, to be better, to stop protecting the wrong people and start protecting the right ones. But clearly that's too much to ask. Clearly, asking for basic accountability is considered too radical, too extreme, too confrontational for daytime television. The silence that followed those words was absolutely deafening. It felt like the entire world had stopped to watch these two people, these two icons, have this moment. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the cameramen seemed to be holding their breath, afraid that any sound or movement might break the spell of this incredible, terrible moment they were capturing. It seemed for just a heartbeat, like Whoopi might respond, like she might say something to bridge this massive chasm that had opened between them. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hand rose as if she was going to gesture. But then she stopped. She closed her mouth. She dropped her hand. She just stood there, arms crossed tightly across her chest, jaw set in a hard line, staring at Jackson with a look that could freeze fire, a look that contained hurt and anger and disappointment and defiance, all mixed together. Jackson shook his head one final time, slowly, deliberately. The gesture said everything without words. Disappointment, frustration, resignation. Then he turned toward the exit and started walking again. As he moved across the studio floor, his footsteps were the only sound in the entire building. The cameras followed him like predators tracking prey, capturing every step of his departure, every moment of this historic confrontation. The other hosts remained frozen at the table, statues carved from shock and discomfort. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. How do you follow that? How do you move on from witnessing something like this? One host had tears in her eyes. Another was staring at his hands, unable to look up. The third was glancing between Whoopi and Jackson's retreating figure, her face a mask of concern and confusion. Just before Jackson disappeared completely from view, just as he was about to walk through that exit and out of the studio forever, he paused one last time. He didn't fully turn around, just looked back over his shoulder. His profile was silhouetted against the bright lights of the studio exit. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured and final. The truth doesn't need your approval, Whoopi. The truth doesn't need your permission or your validation. It just is. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. And eventually, everyone's going to have to face it, including you. And with that final statement hanging in the air like smoke, Samuel L. Jackson walked out of the View studio. The security guards followed him out, their job essentially done. The heavy studio door closed behind them with a solid thunk that seemed to punctuate the entire confrontation like an exclamation point at the end of a very angry sentence. Whoopi stood there in the middle of the studio for what felt like forever. She wasn't moving. She wasn't speaking. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly, her breathing heavy from the intensity of the confrontation. You could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The other hosts sat in absolute silence, not daring to move or speak. One of them had her hand pressed over her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Another was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. The audience remained frozen. Some people were crying. Others looked angry. Many just looked confused and uncomfortable, like they'd witnessed something too raw and real for morning television. Finally, after that long, terrible silence, Whoopi took a deep breath. She smoothed down her jacket, ran a hand through her hair, and, when she turned back to the cameras, her face was a mask of controlled emotion. "Well," she said, and her voice was steady, but you could absolutely hear the emotion underneath it. "That's not how we expected this morning to go. We're going to take a commercial break. We need a moment. I need a moment. And when we come back, we'll try to make sense of what just happened here." The moment the cameras were off, the tension in the studio seemed to release all at once. People started talking, moving, reacting. The crew members were gathering in small groups. The other hosts immediately rushed to Whoopi's side, putting supportive hands on her shoulders. The security guards had escorted Jackson through the backstage area, past crew members who stood with their mouths hanging open in shock, past producers frantically talking into their headsets. Jackson didn't say a single word to any of them. He kept his head high, his back straight, his expression unreadable. He walked with that same confident stride he'd walked in with. But everything had changed. His car was waiting outside the studio. Jackson got in without a word, and the car pulled away from the building, away from the view, away from what would become one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television history. Back in the studio, as the commercial break continued, Whoopi sat back down at the table. She took a long sip of water, her hands still shaking. The other hosts tried to make small talk, tried to lighten the mood, tried to figure out how they were possibly going to continue the show. When the cameras came back on, Whoopi addressed the audience directly. "I want to say something to everyone watching right now. What you just witnessed is not how we conduct ourselves here at The View. We pride ourselves on having difficult conversations, but we do it with respect, with civility. What happened here today crossed a line, and I take responsibility for my part in letting it get to that point." She paused, collecting herself. "But I also want to be clear. I will not apologize for defending my work, for defending my legacy, for standing up when someone accuses me of being part of the problem. I've dedicated my life to opening doors, to creating opportunities, to fighting battles that most people will never know about." But even as Whoopi said those words, even as she tried to regain control and move forward, everyone watching knew this moment would define the show for weeks to come. This wasn't just another debate. This was deeply personal. This was raw. This was real. Samuel L. Jackson had walked out of The View's studio, but the echoes of that confrontation would continue to shake through Hollywood. As clips started spreading across social media, as news outlets picked up the story, one thing became crystal clear. When titans clash, when giants go to war, everyone feels the impact. Last night, we all felt it. Every single person who witnessed that confrontation felt the intensity, the rawness, the reality of it. And nobody who saw it is going to forget what happened when Samuel L. Jackson and Whoopi Goldberg reached their breaking point. This was television history, being made in the most uncomfortable, most dramatic, most unforgettable way possible.